Hi everyone, and here we are in week 9, getting through them really quickly now. So today we're going to talk about public and private policing. So how many of you actually watched the video that's on the portal last week to look at what do we do in Queensland? What do police actually do? What do you actually see them do? All I see them doing is chasing people. We see them riding horses a bit more when there are protests and things going on. So a lot of what we think about police comes from the media, but we don't see what happens behind the scenes. And I suspect that if we actually did, we'd probably think it could be quite a boring job. Okay, so what do police actually do? Well, historically, the role of police was to deter crime by their presence. When we look back over the last couple of centuries, when police first came into being, they used to just stand there and hope that their presence was a deterrent. But they had lots and lots of other jobs to do that they just simply don't do anymore. So, for instance, it was the role of police to go around and light street lamps because they all had to be physically lit. They used to run soup kitchens for people who were homeless or hungry. They used to recover lost children, capture runaway animals, respond to fires, and they used to whistle to summon other police. This is what they used to do. I don't know if any of you are fans of a TV show called Murdoch Mysteries, but that's set in Canada back at the beginning of the 19th century, and it started in the 1800s, moved to the 1900s. And you can see that in there that the police are all out on the street on foot, and if something happens and they need another police officer, they simply blow on their whistle really, really hard. So they accumulated many diverse jobs over the 19th and 20th century because there was nobody else to do them. All those jobs I described to you, there was nobody else to do them. So why have their jobs diversified? Well, there are lots more people are more educated, so police need to be too. So professionalism has moved to divest police of many of the functions that I discussed, but they very much still are emergency and reactive based. So they've got much higher ethics than even 30 years ago. And I want you to think about the differences between reactive and proactive policing. So reactive, waiting for something to happen. Proactive, get out there and stop it from happening. Okay, so what is the history of policing in this world? Well, prior to 1829, it was largely a private matter. So it was a private hiring of a person to enforce the law. And this photo here, or it's an artist's impression of what an early police officer would look like. So they did things like being the village watchman. They were volunteers and very poorly paid. There wasn't any uniforms. They just wore whatever they wanted to wear. So during industrialisation in London, the population grew really quickly. So even then, most of the crime that we have today didn't exist. So because there's no cars, no planes, no bombs, no electricity, nothing like that. So it really was just keeping law and order. So it wasn't until 1829 when Sir Robert Peel introduced salaried police officers in London. They were called the New Police. And their objectives were to prevent crime, firstly, but the detection and punishment of offenders. So these new police were uniformed, so they now became much easier to see. So they were very visible. They patrolled on foot, obviously, there were no vehicles, and they were unarmed in designated areas. British police officers are still unarmed. They do not carry firearms in public. So these police officers in the New Police walked the streets and they got to know the people that lived in their area. There were no ranks in the New Police and all jobs were the same. So the intent was to deter crime and hastily attend the scene. Lots of eyes around. If you know the people in your community, they will talk to you, so the police knew when something happened. So there were some similarities with policing today. Today, police are still constantly patrolling, but they're not just on foot anymore. and they are reactive as they rush to the scene of serious offences. But there's technological advances that we've got today that change totally the way police work is done. So the first major change to patrolling was the introduction of detective units followed by specialist squads. And this happened really slowly as the need arose. So listed here are a whole heap of different squads that we've got now that we never used to have before. And I want you to think about, what do each of these branches do? What does the dog squad do? Water police, CERT, scientific officers, bomb squad. Okay, so there are lots and lots of different squads, and they have very specialised policing roles that play in the community. So each state and territory in Australia has their own police agency, reflecting that we are, as a country, a federation. The Australian Federal Police enforces federal criminal law and also provides policing for the ACT. Okay, so we have every state and territory plus federal police. Compare that to the US, where you've got one state, and I'm doing Texas because Maesa was able to give us the information. Texas has 300 counties. Each county has a sheriff and police. Big cities within the county have several separate police. Then Texas has the Texas Rangers. You know, if you've all watched the TV show Walker, Texas Ranger. This causes big problems because some of them don't like to share information, and it can lead to a great big pissing competition between them. So each Australian state has one police force, which is much more practical and probably much cheaper than running 300 to 350 separate police agencies just in one state in America. And then they've got federal police on top of that. Okay, so these state police and territory police all operate as hierarchical organisations. So it's like a pyramid from the most junior officers up to the commissioner. And I hope you all know who the current Queensland Commissioner is. I've paused there to let you think about it. It's Katarina Carroll, who is the very first female police commissioner in Queensland, and a great lady. Okay, how does this help with maintaining integrity when you have a pyramid of ranks from the junior officer to the top? I need you to think about that. Careers in policing traditionally were only available to privileged males who met height and weight restrictions. Women were not always welcome. They did not have the same powers as men or a uniform, and men would make it really, really difficult for women to be in the service. When women finally were fully accepted and got a uniform, they were given a short dress, which made it really impractical for day-to-day work. Because can you imagine trying to chase down an offender, scaling a fence or something like that if you're wearing a short dress? It was just really impractical. Females were also encouraged to leave when they got pregnant and not come back. So the careers in policing was never made easy for women. Of course, now women are welcomed and play an integral role in policing, but it wasn't always that way. Modern Australian police services have policies and practices which facilitate policing careers for the broad cross-section of society, including women. Not always successfully, but they do. And it's a really great time now for women to join us, as the police service is actively seeking women and encouraging them to join up. Okay, policing in Australia. According to the Police Federation of Australia, we currently have around 63,000 police officers Australia-wide. Okay, I'm going to change the screen because I've got up to date, so just stand by. All right, let's start this slide again because I had what I'm reading off, I had different information, so I've fixed it up. All right, according to the Police Federation of Australia, we currently have around 63,000 police officers Australia-wide. Around 12,000 of those are in Queensland. Keeping in mind that our population is around 25 to 26 million. Okay, and the police here also employ a number of civilian staff. The USA has over 1 million police officers for a population of over 327 million people. The UK has 123,000 plus, and it's going down there, that they're losing police officer jobs over there all the time. Now, these are figures before any of this COVID or defunding police or anything like that started. I don't know what the current rate is in the USA, whether it is still sitting at over 1 million or whether there has been some losses due to all the issues that are going on. So that's the best information I've got at this time. So research indicates that the function of police remains similar to that of the new police and not crime fighting as depicted in the media. It is evidence-based policing. What is the CJC? Where this information came from, or this information here came from? Well, the CJC is the Criminal Justice Commission, which is now the Triple C. It started as the CJC, it went to something else, and now it's the Crime and Corruption something. The Triple C, where Greg works, okay? So they look after all of the misconduct of police, but they also do a lot more than that, as I'm sure Greg would tell you. But this is what they found. This is evidence-based, looking at the evidence. 21% of their calls to police is about attending disturbances, neighbourhood disputes, loud noise and parties. 21%, 1 in 5 of their call outs. So, of course, people then start to call them the party police. Traffic matters, 16% of calls, so all those hoon calls and things like that. Community assistance, 8%. This is things like a cat stuck in a tree or car break-ins, things like that, and attending security alarms. So most of their work is reactive, not leaving enough time for proactive. So what are their powers? Well, they're known as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system, and they have extensive powers around that. As you will know from doing police courts and criminal law with Greg, they are, their power is enshrined in the PPRA 2000 Queensland. Now, gatekeepers of the criminal justice system, important to understand what that means. This is the role that police play in deciding what's going to happen to someone that they pull over or arrest or detain or whatever. They have the ability to push them through the gate and into the criminal justice system, where they will then be dealt with by the courts and maybe with corrections. Or they have the ability, especially if it's someone young, to move them on or to give them a warning and don't actually push them through the gate so that they don't move into the criminal justice system. So this is where police powers are well above those of general citizens. Moving people on, shooing them off, go away. Okay? Seizing property as long as they've got a warrant, and they can keep you against your will. They have the right to kill people. Under the PPRA, they have the right to kill people, and we have seen that happen. The shooting in Mount Gravatt just a couple of weeks ago, where the person that the police were trying to give a summons to came at a police officer with a knife, and his partner shot the offender. I thought it was originally only reported that she shot him twice, but I've since read that it could have been up to 10 times. She would not be shooting to hit his leg or an arm to just stop him. You aim for the biggest part of the body, which is the torso, and that's where she aimed for. Okay? So they do have the right to kill. But what if they shot someone who's threatening them with a fake gun? Should they be arrested for that? If I was to point a fake gun at you, would you know the difference between a fake gun and a real gun? Because some of these fake guns can look really real. And if someone's waving a gun at you and saying they're going to shoot you, you don't have the time to say, look, hang on, just stop a sec. I just want to check your gun, make sure it's a fake gun and not a real gun before I go and shoot you. It's all done on instinct and training and self-preservation, I think, sometimes. So, as we've discussed before, we have a social contract in society. We give up some of our rights, such as avenging a wrong against us, and give it to the police. Okay? That's why they've got different and stronger protections for mistakes made, such as protections against false arrest, protections against shooting someone who's got a fake gun because they didn't know that it was fake. We have sworn and unsworn police officers. What do you think it is that they actually swear? Do they swear to uphold the law and work within the Act? Is that what they're swearing? All right. Policing and dangerous. This can be such a hugely dangerous job. They are often involved in physically and potentially dangerous situations. Have a look at some of these figures. 75% of patrol officers required to break up fights and control crowds. 85% required to carry, move or restrain a person. 33%, which is about a third of officers required to draw their firearm in any year. And this is 20 years ago when it was still the CJC. So these numbers possibly have changed. I would suggest this bottom one has probably gone up. It may have changed because since 1998 they've gotten tasers, and so they might be drawing tasers as well. So, you know, it does have fatal consequences for the police. It's only a few years ago now that we had a police officer by the name of Damien Leading who was shot and killed at Pacific Pines Tavern. They got a call out that there was a hold up going on. They got there and one of the offenders shot him in the face and he died, leaving behind the most gorgeous little boy you've ever seen, who's probably a little bit more grown up now, and a wife. We had the shooting of Brett Fort up in Toowoomba, or down on from Toowoomba near Gatton or Halidon, somewhere around there, where he and his partner drove into an ambush and their car crashed, and he managed to back it up first, but he protected her and ended up dying himself and left behind a wife and children. Okay, so every year there is a commemoration undertaken for police officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty, and we nearly had another one at Malcolmbat just a couple of weeks ago. So policing is increasingly recognised as a profession. It's so much more than just a job. They have a lot of education that they get. When you do your police basic course, there's a lot of education involved. And they have in-service training, professional development. Every year they have to do a course in conflict resolution and they have to do firearms training every year, every single one of them. Any of you who've been to the Gold Coast campus, you can hear them practicing at the Edmund Rice Centre, where police officers do their retraining. It's quite near the campus and you will hear the guns going off over there quite a bit. It is a traditionally still male-dominated profession, as are most professions like this, but gradually more women are in policing, and Indigenous people, which is really important in Indigenous communities, because they're able to relate to those communities and build those connections. They attempt to identify competency. So what is police knowledge? Post-Fitzgerald, those of you who are not aware, the Fitzgerald inquiry happened in the late 80s into police corruption in Queensland. And there were many recommendations made from that. And after Fitzgerald, all police recruits were required to have a degree. And the reason behind this is that it was to make it more professional and make these police officers less likely to be able to be corrupted, to give them a bit of life experience and have them a little bit older when they're going in as police officers. So since that changed in 2013, and they are now back to accepting recruits without this. Okay, the point of requiring a degree builds a more rounded person. If you join the military, you get specific training for one job. So if you go into the army as a sniper, that's all you'll be able to do. Having a degree means you've got more to offer, especially if you want to leave. But have a think about it. How would you feel being arrested by someone your own age or an 18-year-old for those of us who are a bit older and really taking them seriously. At least when the police recruits had a degree, they were in their early 20s usually before they started their police training, and it seemed to add a lot to the profession. Policing profession used to be quite low paid, and it was more about being physically strong and willing to get into fights to break them up. And that's not what we want to do now. We want to be a bit smarter in how we deal with people. And having recruits who are a little bit older and a little bit wiser can go a long way to helping with that. Okay, so I spoke before about police being the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. Well, much police work still involves attending disturbances, patrol work and traffic control. When anything ever happens, the first responders are the police. They make all the decisions, specifically around who they're going to allow through the gate or push through the gate into the criminal justice system and who to divert. Because have a think about what would happen if they just simply arrested every single person that they came across who was committing a crime, no matter how small or how big. The costs would go through the roof. Our court system would be totally clogged up. So they have different branches, such as the specialist units that they can push things onto. They can decide not to let someone go through the gate and just give them a warning. But they have other functions as well. Okay, they maintain public relations. So I know we haven't had the Ekka on this year, but they always have a display at the Ekka, and I used to love going to it as a kid, but it used to freak me out a bit because they would have actual pieces of evidence from crime scenes there, and it quite often involved bloody clothes. So it freaked me out when I was a kid. Now I love it. But adopt a cop, schools with an adopt a cop. Police coming into your school to talk about drugs and drinking, coming into the school to talk about schoolies, which probably won't happen this year, but maintaining public relations and talking to kids so that they don't have this fear of police officers. Because let's face it, with those big vests that they have on with all the equipment on it these days, they can look quite scary. And here's a bit of trivia for you, those vests and the equipment weigh about 8 kilos. So what shapes police work? Well, no 2 days are alike, but it shapes what they do every day. There's tradition, rituals, accepted ways about going about the job, expectations. It has a strong quasi-military hierarchy. And this is due to the fact that after World War I, a lot of soldiers joined the police. And same happens after every war. A lot of the ex-service personnel will join the police because they've become embedded in that military way of life, and they find police gives them that a little bit more than having a different job outside of the defence. So the top rank in Queensland is called the Commissioner, but in the US they have military rank names. So 2 examples that they've got is discretion and occupational culture. So discretion is they've got the discretion to throw you in jail or send you home. This is cognitive decision making, and unfortunately it can lead to things happening that are not good, like racial bias, and that is a huge problem in the Northern Territory with young people. And they have this occupational culture, and this is what's called the thin blue line, and it's the border between civilians and police. So police are a really tight-knit group with similar values because quite simply they go through things that others don't. And I think you could say the same about a lot of emergency service workers, nurses, doctors. They see things and do things that the rest of us don't. So they become very tight-knit groups. So discretion, decision making, professional autonomy to make decisions about the right course of action. Now there are conflicting views about this. Does it contribute to fairness or justice? Does it contribute to bias, which can be racial, unfairness, arbitrariness, inconsistency? Okay, so there is one set of rules for all state-based police. But overall, discretion can be used to keep stupidity out of the court. Because I'd like you to have a think about how would your life be different if you were arrested. and it can cause a lot of problems for people later in life. You only have to watch one of those border security TV shows to see people who've tried to come into Australia, who've done something really stupid 10 to 15 years ago, served their time, gone off and had a successful life, never done any more offending, but they're still not let into the country and they're turned around and sent home. So things like that can really affect your life once you commit a crime and you've got a record. Professionals within the criminal justice system will defend their right to discretion, and it is an expectation of police professionals and a necessity for getting the job done. Like I said before, if they did not have that discretion, the courts would be absolutely clogged up and nothing would move forward. But it does not mean that anything goes. They still have to follow the regulations under the PPRA. Okay, so an example might be using their discretion when deciding whether to charge a first-time offender, particularly a juvenile who might have done something, really minor, or it's a nuisance type offence where they've just gone and knocked on doors but disturbed people and they've called the police. Okay, that's where discretion is used. The occupational culture is to do with what they see at work every day and the pressures and the tension. So if you risk death at work, your coping mechanism might be a little different. You have to process what you see every day. And you could be seeing bodies, horrendous crime and accidents, and you're seeing people at their absolute worst and most vulnerable. So that's why we end up with this police occupational culture. So they have these means by which they're socialised. So it's a long process of socialised before and after joining. They have family links, media portrayals, anticipatory socialisation. So they learn on the job, and you become stronger the longer that you're in it. They have this thing about sticking by your mates, police as family. So you will defend those mates to the death. They have a code of silence. So if somebody stuffs up, you're not going to talk about it because police are family. And that can be a negative consequence, the code of silence. They will often socialise within their professional group and choose to be in this group. And the reason for that is that they trust their police mates, and they may be concerned if they're around others that they might be put into a position of upholding the law and acting against their mates. So the example there would be if you had a social gathering and there was a police officer there who just happened to be a friend of the person running the gathering, but there were other people there who were not police officers, and somebody did something that was illegal. Is that police officer then duty bound that they have to do something about it simply because they are a police officer even though they're not at work at that time? So it can be a reason why they'll stick to police as their friends. Okay, we're going to do a little case study here now. All right, you can see that there is a Brisbane Times article there for you to read, and I think there's a video embedded in that as well when I checked it. So I would encourage you to go and watch that to get the whole background to this. So this was about the behaviour of police who watched a former officer. He wasn't a former officer, he was an officer at the time, bash a tourist and a barmaid in the state's north, and they refused to intervene to show that it was not reflective of wider police culture. And the police minister said that them not doing that was not reflective of the wider police culture. He supported the QPS service's decision to release video footage of the ex-policeman bashing a 23-year-old commercial diver and forcing a fire hose into his mouth. The footage was released a day after Price was sentenced to 27 months jail for assault. He is also seen hitting a 21-year-old barmaid in the video. Not only did he hit her, he picked her up by the hair from off the ground to stand her on her feet. What an absolute hero. But the police minister described the behaviour of the officers who watched the assaults without reporting the incidents or intervening as absolutely appalling, but he refuted any suggestions that their behaviour was in line with the rest of the police force. I don't think it is any secret. This is appalling, shameful behaviour. These people should have put their hands up earlier. I don't think anyone who sees this footage and sees the officers who are standing by would excuse that behaviour. A number of them resigned as a result of it, and there are others who still face disciplinary action, and he felt they should hang their heads in shame. Now, the person who brought all this to light was a lone female officer who came forward with the complaint against Price, which led to his successful prosecution. And the minister said she should be strongly supported by the community and the police service. The positive thing that came out of this is there was a fellow officer who had the courage to put up her hand and make a complaint against this officer. I think in the QPS now the figures are around a quarter of all complaints against other officers are made by police themselves. That is a positive change in culture, and it is something that I think Queenslanders will wholeheartedly support. Okay, so we do have issues in our police culture. This only happened a few years ago, maybe 8 years ago. I can't remember exactly when it happened, but it's not too far in the distant past. And traditionally, any police officer who would dob in another police officer, as this woman did, would get treated very, very badly by their fellow officers, because it would be seen as dobbing, and that was frowned upon. No matter how bad the behaviour of the officer was, that would be seen as dobbing. Okay, so crisis in confidence can drive change. That thin blue line here, that is a video for you to watch. So have a look at that, and let me just go back to the right page. Oh yes, this thin blue line here is all about Flint and Ferguson and Baltimore. Now these are not stories that are from the current times with everything that's going on in America. These are from a few years ago. But a crisis in confidence. What if we kept seeing officers like Price from the previous incident doing what they are doing? Would this cause a crisis of confidence? What does that mean? Well, it means that we, the public, have no confidence in the police to do their job correctly, following the PPRA and supporting people in the community. We've got to be able to trust them to uphold our social contract, or they're going to lose their legitimacy. Okay, have a look at that video and then move on to the next slide. So, crisis in confidence. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Increasing crime and increasing offenders. Imagine if we had a murder every week in Brisbane or a serial rapist. We would like to think that our police would go out to solve those crimes. Crisis in confidence can result from too much reactive policing. Well, what does this mean? It means that police might only go to specific areas and not to areas where they're most needed. They might make an arrest for the sake of making an arrest, and organised crime might move in. Traditional police responses would not impacting on reducing crime or preventing crime. Communities not feeling engaged with the police. So again, not having police walking the beat and engaging with the community. If they're not doing those things and the community doesn't feel engaged with them. Police numbers not increasing in line with offending numbers. So think about Flint. The numbers decreased in Flint. A lot of the officers were sacked and they had the highest crime rate in the country. So new ways of doing business were needed, working smarter and not harder. And this is just absolutely so relevant, especially in America at the moment, where there is a very big crisis of confidence going on in police forces over there. And remember, there's thousands of them. So what influences policing? Well, a change of government can be really challenging, because a new government's going to bring in changes and new ideas. And so, for instance, when Campbell Newman came in 2012, he brought in helicopters, which we still have now. We have 2 of them, and they are used constantly to the point where they've worn the first one out and they're getting a new one. they have become such a fantastic tool in policing. So we've got these police helicopters, but he was also the one that got rid of degrees. And part of getting rid of degrees meant that he could bring in more police get more police trained because they didn't have to have the degrees anymore. Okay, so just changing government. When Palaszczuk came in, she got rid of everyone at the top of the service except for the commissioner and did a total restructure. We have another state election coming up this year, and if there's a change of government, then there could be a change in policy related to the police again. So that will influence how policing is done. So in the late 80s, when we had the Fitzgerald inquiry, the whole police just about was shut down and new people were put into high ranking positions because the commissioner was one of the ones found to have been corrupt. We have a police union in Queensland. They have a lot of power because nobody wants the police to go on strike. So the police union does wield a lot of power. They also do a lot of really good work in supporting their officers, especially when they're injured or something happens. So the police are the face of state authority. They are the front end of the criminal justice system. And they would hate those videos that go around showing cops doing bad things because the vast majority of them are not like that. Okay, that's the end of part one. Now we've discussed policing. We're going to move on to community and private policing in part two.